Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Clocked In with the Press, hosted at Altman Studios in beautiful downtown Brentwood, California. In this podcast, we highlight news stories, individuals, and organizations that deserve your attention. This is your host, Melissa Van Rooten, clocking in. Today, we've also got press publisher Greg Robinson in the studio, and we'll be chatting with Brentwood Police Department's Chief Tom Hansen. We're going to be covering a variety of topics, including city crime rates, a couple of state bills that have been passed, and a new state-of-the-art training program for officers. But first, let's hear a quick word from this episode's sponsor.
This episode of Clocked In with the Press is sponsored by Bill Brandt Ford at 8100 Brentwood Boulevard, right here in Brentwood. For award-winning sales, service, and all your Ford needs, think Bill Brandt Ford at 8100 Brentwood Boulevard.
Chief Hansen, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Melissa, how are you? Greg?
Good to see you. Thanks for having us.
I would love for you to start by just telling us a little bit about yourself and your journey to becoming the Brentwood Police Department Police Chief.
Sure. My name's Tom Hansen, born and raised in Contra, Costa County. Love this county. My journey in law enforcement started in 1987 with the Walnut Creek Police Department, where I became a reserve officer, and eventually made it out to the East County and was hired by the Brentwood Police Department in 1995. So I worked my way up the ranks, and I'm currently the police chief. I've been the police chief for 5 years now, and I feel extremely honored to serve our great community of Brentwood.
And you've done a great job.
Thank you.
What's your favorite part?
The people of Brentwood.
Nice.
And the trust that they put in me and my organization.
What's the worst part?
Seeing people get victimized. That's always been the worst part, for sure.
Sure. Let's jump into just talking about Brentwood, in your time here, and especially the last 5 years. What are some of the types of crime that we typically see here in Brentwood?
Well, we typically see our property crime as most, and our assaults. Seems like over the last couple of years during COVID, our assaults have increased. So that's kind of bothersome. I have seen people's tolerance a lot lower and people having a little less patience with one another, which is concerning.
And that seems to be kind of a nationwide trend.
I think so.
As
yeah,
well.
I believe so.
Different reports that I've seen, you see the uptick in gun violence and whatnot.
So with the increase in crime, do you feel that with the district attorney and a lot of people are feeling that, these smaller, low-level crimes more are happening because the criminals feel like they're not being prosecuted? And I know as a police officer and a police chief, it must be very frustrating. You arrest these people, and by the time you take them to Martinez, by the time you get back to Brentwood, many a times they're out. Do you feel that that's part of why our crime has gone up, because some of these people feel like there's no consequence?
Absolutely, but I would take it to the state level. I think ever since 2011, the passage of Assembly Bill 109, which is a realignment of prisoners being released from our prisons and put into the custody of our counties, who sometimes some of our counties didn't have the resources to deal with this influx of released felons. It overwhelmed some of our communities, and we started to see these people that should have been incarcerated released back in our communities. Then you can go into 2014. I believe there's a lot of lawmakers that believed it was important to decriminalize laws and that we were being too unfair to criminals, such as the passage of Prop 47, which I know was a voter-passed bill. However, there was a lot of strong political will behind that, and I believe there's some title of that Prop 47 that was deceptive to the public, such as the Safe Schools Act. Then we can go down to Prop 57, Prop 47, a lot of early release out of our prisons. Next month, we will have closed 2 prisons this year. And there was about 73,000 prisoners that have been released out in our communities the last 2 years. This all came down, very supported much by our governor. So when we talk about criminals being emboldened, of course, it's a good time in California to be a criminal. It's very lucrative.
That's the biggest concern, and I'm glad that you said that, because the law enforcement officers are doing their job and doing a great job in arresting these people. And it's important that the public know that it's not the police that are the problem. It's the fact that the district attorney doesn't want to prosecute them.
A lot of these bills that you mentioned, they are designed to distinguish between violent offenders and nonviolent offenders. For the nonviolent offenders, what would you recommend as a way of rehab or reconciliation Do you think that's even possible?
Well, Melissa, we've talked about this offline a few times, so I think you and I could have a very robust conversation on what we consider violent and nonviolent crimes. Prop 47 decriminalized a lot of drug laws. I could go out right now and point to many violent crimes that occur in the city of Brentwood, and they spiral right back to drugs, mainly methamphetamine. So when we start not prosecuting for people for having a big bag of meth in their pocket, I'm convinced that they're going to go off and commit other crimes. It's a lot of our property crimes directly relate back to someone's addiction to drugs.
For sure.
Now, I don't like what I'm seeing the last few years, and you'll hear the governor and the attorney general come out and say that they're all for victims' rights. Well, you know what? Victim rights come down to not passing laws on letting violent felons out of prison 10 years before their sentence was to be done because of good behavior. I'm sorry that some of these murderers are getting out a third sooner than a jury sentenced them to. So we could go round and round. I could talk for many, many hours, and I could debate this issue. The bottom line is I'm the police chief responsible for the safety of 65,000 residents in here, and I don't appreciate suspect rights over victim rights. What happened to the victim? Where's the empathy and sympathy for them? What about these crime victim families that have to sit there and see someone that murdered their family released from prison 10 years earlier than they should have been?
100%. And on that matter, that I do agree with you.
Mm-hmm.
It makes it more difficult for you to do your job well. It adds to the level of difficulty.
Well, I think there's two things that need to be pointed out here is these lawmakers that have never been on the street, never experienced poverty, homelessness, being a victim of crime, never look at what the unintended consequences are of these bills that are being passed. I could tell you the consequences of Prop 47, okay? I could tell you that this was going to happen. And number two, you may say, oh, you know what, we've mistreated criminals in the past. I've heard this from lawmakers. What, do you want to stack the gun enhancements and the gang enhancements? Is that fair? What do you mean, is that fair? Of course I want to stack it. If the crime has the elements to convict that person of it, yes, I want to have them serve a minimum 5 years enhancement on a gun crime.
Sure.
And who are you to take that away? Because when you pass these laws, you may say that you're balancing it. And I don't want anybody mistreated in this country. The bottom line is these little laws that you pass altogether, it's creating an environment that is ripe for the criminal. And now you have villainized the police, the California police officer, to the point where they're afraid to do their job. That if they make a mistake, because I'd love to see some of these lawmakers come out here and have to make the decisions that my officers have to make in a split second, and then you have all months and years to decide whether you're going to charge them with a crime. I have a real problem with that. And I just want to say this. I said it before. California's putting themselves in an area now where they're going to have to pay a police officer a ton of money to come and do this job. Because I just heard last week, San Francisco's down 550 police officers' positions. They put a test on last week. They had 8 people show up. Oof. 8.
Wow.
It's definitely a difficult profession to go into right now with some of the animosity and some of the things that have been happening in the past few years. So I do feel for you on that. Let's move on to what I would consider a win for officers in the area. Earlier this year, Brentwood PD joined Contra Costa County Human Trafficking Task Force on the statewide Operation Reclaim and Rebuild initiative. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, we've been partnering with Contra Costa Human Trafficking Task Force for quite a while now, and we've participated in the Reclaim and Rebuild operation for the past 3 years. And this operation is a 1-week operation where police departments from all around the state get together and really focus in on arresting people that operate in human trafficking. And we do it around the week of the Super Bowl. We see an uptick in human trafficking around the week of the Super Bowl. A lot of people flying into those certain areas to celebrate that week of Super Bowl, and we see the human trafficking going up. You know, it's been very successful over the past 3 years, and we're saving dozens of usually young women from that life of human trafficking, which is a problem that is in plain sight all over America right now.
What would you recommend to the general public if we're on a flight or if we're out in public? What are some things that we could be watching for that would possibly tip us off as to whether somebody is being trafficked?
Yeah, that's a great question. These people that manipulate these young ladies into being a victim of this crime, a lot of times they'll get them hooked on drugs, and they can almost come across as being a willing participant when we know that's not the case. So they're so heavily manipulated. I would tell you that if you see something that's totally out of the ordinary or something that the hair on the back of your neck stands up, call your local police department and explain what you're seeing. We'd rather be called and go out there and make sure it's nothing than you walk away and we're not made aware of it. And that goes with anything. I mean, again, Brentwood Police Department is the citizens of Brentwood Police Department. That means if you need us or you need to call us, we're a full functioning police department. This is your police department. Please feel comfortable to call us.
When we talk about human trafficking, it's not necessarily just sex trafficking.
No.
I can remember a few years ago, I think it was shortly, maybe a year or two after I moved to Brentwood, there was a restaurant that got
labor
busted.
trafficking, yeah.
Yeah, for labor. Were you part of that operation?
I was not part, but I know officers of the Brentwood Police Department were heavily involved in that investigation. Yeah. Yes.
And so it extends just beyond the sex trafficking. It's labor, it's, restaurant workers, or you see a lot of massage or nail salons.
Farm workers.
Yeah.
I was just say, I think the good rule of thumb for the listeners is that, like Chief Hansen said, if you see something that doesn't seem right, call the police. I do some volunteer work with the police department myself as a neighborhood watch trainer years ago, and that's one that we talk to people is if it doesn't look right, call. The police would much rather come out and find out that it's nothing than having to come back 2 hours later and write a report. So encourage the listeners to speak up and to let the officers know, and it's all about making people safe and keeping Brentwood safe.
Just to add to that is, I can remember some of my best arrests came from calls in from our citizens. Really, I mean, we got 65,000 eyes out there. We only have, 4 cops on the street. So we need that participation.
And we'll talk about Neighborhood Watch a little bit later on, too. I have some questions about that. But yeah, for sure, it's better to be wrong. What is that they say? If you see something, say something. It's better to be wrong than to have somebody living the life of being trafficked, for sure. Moving on. In September, Assembly Bill 481 was passed. To my understanding, this is new legislation that will affect police departments' funding, acquisition, and use of so-called military equipment. What does that look like for Brentwood?
Yeah, I have feedback from members of our public that were concerned, and rightly so, on this, but it was no big change in the police department. This was a bill brought forward. I think it's good legislation. Listen, communities need to know what their police departments are doing for the most part. We've had a SWAT team here since the late 90s. And we equip our SWAT team with some military equipment, standard military equipment. This bill and this law gives an opportunity for community to have some input into that. And this law, and Captain Herbert, the Brentwood Police Department, worked very well with our legal department at City Hall to pass an ordinance to get a policy in place that's currently on our website. We're not out buying tanks. We're not out buying 50 calibers. We do use some weapons that were defined under the new law.
Because they've changed some of how things are categorized in this bill as well, right? So items that typically wouldn't be considered military grade, and I'm using air quotes for for people who can't see this because it's a podcast, and often when people hear anything about police and military equipment, they do jump to those conclusions that it is tanks and, and that the drone usage is going to somehow infringe on their privacy, things of that nature. So what can you say that would clear up some of those misconceptions?
So all really good concerns, because me as a citizen, I would be concerned too of a police drone flying over my house, looking in on my family or inside my house. So something we're very cognizant of. We have some good policy in place to prevent that. Yeah, some of the stuff that's listed in the law, I mean, it's some really heavy duty military equipment. And I've said this before, I'm very cognizant of a community. And I say community because I really limit my focus and a lot of my energy on the city of Brentwood. I know some of those concerns that citizens have, and they're great concerns. And I've said this before, I'm ready to sit down, talk to you, show you our policy, go over it, because I want you to know that any equipment that we acquire for our SWAT team mainly, is to respond to a critical incident that involves that equipment. I've said this before, our city council has been very supportive of public safety, and I've been so lucky as a police chief to have some councils that are just tremendous when it comes to that, and they trust me. They know that I'm not going to come to them unless I really need it. The citizens of Brentwood put a lot of trust in me to keep them safe, and I hope I never need that equipment, but if I do, it's readily available and my officers are trained to use it.
Well, and I think what people forget is when you talk about citizen safety, you're also talking about your officers and the equipment that's going to keep them safe. I've seen some of this equipment in use, the drones, the shields, some of the larger guns, for different situations. And while I might have my own opinions about what comes through, my husband and I, he's former military and we've had conversations about it before, there does need to be an understanding that you want to be the safest that you absolutely can be, no matter what job you hold. And it takes it up a notch when you are a first responder, fire, police, EMT, so you want to be able to have the best equipment to keep you protected on the job. And for those of you listening, when Chief Hansen says that he welcomes you to come and sit down and chat with him, I know for a fact that he means it. We've had tons of great conversations just about the state of policing and, laws coming through and all different things in California. So,
yes, I'd like to just add, I was sworn in as police chief 5 years ago. Unless you've experienced this, I can't explain it to you, but the day I raised my right hand and they swore me in to be the police chief, I really mean this when I felt a physical pressure on my shoulders. And it was right when I was walking out of the community center today, and it was the great responsibility to keep people safe and my officers safe. I will never hesitate to go forward and to obtain equipment that I know will keep my citizens safe and my officers safe. And just so you know, we talk about tanks. Tanks is a big one. Years ago, they brought forward to me, some members of the department, to obtain an MRAP from the military. Well, I knew that MRAP would not go over in our little community, right? However, as we start to see things unfold just this week in Buffalo and whatnot, we will be coming forward to council to ask for a rescue vehicle. The rescue vehicle is an armor vehicle. It's not a big tank, but it is available in the event that I have citizens in a mass shooting, a Gilroy Garlic type incident, a AMC shooting incident, where we can get in there right now and save my community members and my police officers in the event somebody comes to town to cause that kind of chaos. And we will be bringing that forward. I'm working on it right now, and we'll be bringing it forward to council.
and it goes back to talking about trafficking again. Better to have it and not need it than to have a situation like that, an unfortunate, tragic situation arise and not have it at all.
Absolutely. And there's people, because I've heard from our community, that ask me questions, and I think to myself, wow, I'm not criticizing you, but you are so out of reality, it's not even funny. I've been asked, are you worried about the Taliban coming here? Well, I'm worried about anybody coming here. I'm more worried about the person right now that's planning something in the garage to hurt innocent people. That's what I'm worried about. And you know what? It happens. And you're exactly right. I'd rather have it available to me than go, oh, you know what? We were thinking about that, and now we don't have it. I have to wait for resources to come all the way out to East County. I don't want to wait there. And I'm telling you, my community supports that.
Well, I think it's important, too, because of the fact that the criminals have access to some of these high-powered guns and rifles, and that was the issue that I remember 20 years ago when police started carrying the machine gun type of guns, that they can't be outgunned by the person that they're trying to take down. So.
Well, we saw that at the Hollywood bank robbery in L.A. about 20 years ago, is the officers had to go to gun stores to try to get some guns that would penetrate that fully armored two suspects. And that we're starting to see that play over and over, where these suspects are coming on fully armored with full body armor. So we are, Brentwood Police Department's equipped right now to handle those situations. We have a SWAT team that works extremely hard to get in there and help our community if they need it. And I think people need to start showing some real appreciation to our police officers who remain vigilant and remain dedicated to this community.
Gun control, criminals with guns, that's a whole separate conversation that it could be a whole separate podcast, right? So I won't dig too deep into that. All I can say is I was, a senior, I think, when Columbine happened. And it's still kind of crazy to me. People say, oh, that's never going to happen here. That's never going to happen here. And then it does, but in the 20 odd years since Columbine, not much has changed as far as gun control. I mean, maybe a little more in California. I was in Massachusetts when all that happened, but at a federal level, and like I said, it's a whole other conversation. But there are things like AB 481 that allows departments to bring themselves up to that level. And so in that way, while I personally am for gun control, I think that it is important to have this legislation that allows you to meet a potential threat level, for sure.
No, that makes sense. And I would just I know we could talk for hours on gun control.
For sure.
Let me just say one thing about gun control, because again, I think I had a meeting last week with Rob Bonta, our Attorney General, and he was very gracious with his time, but him and I will never see eye to eye on any of these issues. Listen, when that shooting came out in Sacramento a couple weeks ago, and those subjects decided to shoot over 100 rounds into a group of innocent people trying to have a good time, I knew they were going to have long rap sheets and they should have been incarcerated. Listen, this is America, and I'm sorry to tell people, but I wrote a paper on this 30 years ago when I was in college. There's over 500 million guns in America right now. You're never going to take all those guns off the street. You're never going to take the guns out of criminals' hands. As we speak right now, someone's house in America is getting broken into, and dozens of guns are being stolen. There'll always be a market out on the street for guns. What we need to concentrate on is keeping people incarcerated that choose to pick a gun up and use it. Those people should never get out of prison. I know the Attorney General talks about rehabilitation. Rehabilitation does not work. It's very ineffective. Okay? Recidivism rates are through the roof in California. Gun control, when we talk about gun control, it's a criminal control. You're never going to control guns in America. I'm sorry. You are going to control people that commit crimes with gun, and they need to be incarcerated. And the more I see out of this administration in Sacramento, the more they're letting violent criminals out of prison because they're closing prisons. Where do you think we're going in this state? They're closing Susanville next month. That's 2,800 criminals getting released out in our communities. I'm sorry, we're headed in the wrong direction. We need to start holding people accountable, especially our Part 1 criminals in the state of California.
So let's change the narrative a little bit here, because I know while you talk about there's a lot of legislation that you're not in favor of, I do know that there's legislation that you strongly support as well. So going back a little further, Assembly Bill 988, the Miles Hall Lifeline Act, it was passed in June of last year. AB 988 creates a new, easy-to-remember 3-digit phone line, 988, as the new 911 for incidences that involve suicidal or immediate mental health crises. With 988, callers will be connected with around-the-clock intervention, including mobile crisis teams staffed by trained mental health professionals and trained peers instead of law enforcement. I know that this was something that you were in favor of and even went to the city of Brentwood and asked them to endorse it. When do you expect that we can see that rolled out locally, if it hasn't been already, and what will it look like?
So yeah, the 988 number is for people that are in current crisis. So they pick the phone up, they call the 988 number, and the county will get resources dispatched soon.
So it's already been rolled out for this
that phone
area.
number's up and running.
Perfect.
So you can also go to the county health services webpage, and they have the Miles Hall crisis line at 833-443-2672. And you can get some help there. No, I'm totally supportive of this. The only concerns I had were on these mobile crisis teams with clinicians and trained people on there. I am concerned that some of my most violent calls I ever went to over my 34 years involved subjects that were going through current mental health crisis. I'm just a little concerned. I know how quickly these calls can escalate. So I am concerned at the safety of the clinicians and whatnot. So I think there'll always be a spot for police response in these, and I know we're still working it out. I will say Contra Costa County, they did a good job of bringing law enforcement in on this and talking to some of those representatives, so I appreciated that.
Obviously, if you are an individual that is struggling with mental illness and you're having a breakdown or an episode, it can exacerbate the problem if a whole group of police officers show up, because in the midst of the crisis, it may trigger the individual to the point of becoming violent. However, sending clinicians and social workers out to maybe begin to try and diffuse it, do you think that there is a way to send a happy medium? So rather than sending 3, 5, however many officers out, you have this team and a single officer is part of the team in case things do go south. Do you think that there's any room for that in this plan?
Absolutely. I do. I think there's a happy medium there. We've been identifying this problem for many years now, and all my officers have gone through crisis intervention training, which is a good thing. But you're exactly right. We could escalate calls like that with someone that's going through a mental health crisis. So there is a happy medium. We're talking about it now. I'm in favor of being able to send some professionals that work in that area other than my police officers. I just hope that those folks that are dealing with this know when to call the police, and that, we can respond to take someone that's violent into mental health custody or into custody, whatever we need to do to get them the help they need.
For sure. And I feel like it's more and more coming to the forefront as mental health becomes a bigger conversation that we have citywide, statewide, nationally. There has been, maybe not as much as I would like to see right away. Rome wasn't built in a day, but there's definitely been more attention paid to, well, no, this isn't a criminal. This is just somebody who is going through it, for lack of a better term. Maybe decided they were feeling well and took themselves off their meds and now is reaping the consequences of that. It's difficult. I myself personally, I live with depression on the daily, and I know what it can do. I call it my mean brain, right? And it tells me these ugly things sometimes. And, and I've definitely had episodes where if the cops showed up, it would have exacerbated
Except
things.
for me, if I would have showed up.
Yeah, right. Well, because you're good. You're good at connecting and talking with people. But, if 3 officers showed up at the door and I'm in the midst of and this is years ago, and I'm in the midst of this breakdown, you're out of control. You're not who you truly are. And so to have somebody, like you said, if it were you, it might have been different. A single officer who's able to connect and is good, at interpersonal communication and, but
I would just like to add one thing that's, I think, very important. You're right. This is being raised to a higher level now, which is a great thing. But traditionally in America, who's been called when no one else has the answer to things? The police. Sure. And some of these have turned out very bad. We've seen that. Things get escalated, and someone with a mental health issue or going through a crisis ends up getting shot by the police. Listen, that's going to still happen. The fact of the matter is people that suffer from extreme mental health issues become violent and can be very violent against police officers. What I'm seeing now is police officers will have to match. Just because you're going through a mental health crisis and you decide to pull a knife or a gun out on a police officer and we use deadly force, it seems right now the narrative is this officer shot this person that was going through, and now it's the officer's fault. We have to be very careful on that balance, because I see that all the time. Like, okay, they had a mental health crisis, but they pulled a knife and a gun out on my police officer. So just because they had a mental health means that the officer shouldn't have done that.
Probably a little different, if you're being threatened, and
but I see some narratives in the media go the other way.
For sure. The anti-police rhetoric and mentality that has been creeping up is definitely something that we will discuss. But first, I'd like to throw it over to our sponsor for a quick message.
Today's episode is sponsored by our friends at Bill Brandt Ford at 8100 Brentwood Boulevard. Speaking personally, I've used the service center at Bill Brandt Ford several times, and I've always been impressed by their commitment to the customer. I used to have this real lemon of a Ford Fusion that I bought from a less reputable dealer, and Dave, the service advisor at Bill Brandt, moved mountains to keep that thing running. My younger sister bought a car from Bill Brandt a couple years ago, and their finance department worked with her budget, and now she drives a nicer car than me. But don't just take my word for it. Bill Brandt Ford is the recipient of the prestigious President's Award from the Ford Motor Company. Only 340 of the roughly 5,000 dealerships nationwide can say the same. Locally, the community has voted them Best of Brentwood for sales and service. Bill Brandt aims to give customers the best dealership experience possible. So what are you waiting for? Give them a call today at 925-634-3551 for all your sales and service needs, or visit BillBrandtFord.com. That's Bill, B-R-A-N-D-T, Ford.com.
Thank you so much for staying with us. Like I said, it's no secret that there's been a lot of anti-police mentality and rhetoric these past few years. What steps have you personally taken, or are you taking, to move your department forward in the face of the recent adversity?
Yeah, I'm not going to tell you that the last few years have been pretty tough, waking up and putting this police uniform on. You know, police departments get painted with a broad brush when anything happens throughout the whole United States. All I can do as a police chief is remain diligent on what our mission is. And I've come up the last few years telling my staff, let's just concentrate on these 15 square miles. I think you've heard me say that before. Because if we go too far out and we start really thinking into what's going on in other areas, not that we don't have to be cognizant of it, because if it's happening somewhere else, we need to make sure it doesn't happen here. And, you know, I can just tell you that we're police officers, we're humans, and we make mistakes. And if we make mistakes, we'll own up to it and we'll try to fix it so it never happens again. But this rhetoric that's going on in all communities that really don't deserve it, in my opinion, is really bothersome. So what we're doing, we're seeing the real effects of this right now, is we're seeing these laws being passed that I don't think our lawmakers are meaning it to send a message to our police, but it surely is. And it's making them feel like the villains. And, you know, I said earlier, you know, 500 officers down, 8 people, that's a pretty concerning statistic, because here at the Brentwood Police Department, we're down 6 officers right now, and I can't hire. It's getting very hard to hire someone. We're getting some entry-level officers that we're having to send to the police academy, so we don't have those years of someone that lived life and have those life experience. So you're going to have a 22-year-old kid coming to your house dealing with the domestic violence. That was me back in the day. I was 21 going to domestic violence saying, you know what, I still live with my parents. So, I mean, we lose that life experience in some of these seasoned people that come into the job. You have completely lost the traditional police officer. There's not a police officer that I know would tell their kid to be a cop anymore. At all. So those years of tradition are gone. It used to be that, you know, all your kids would be cops. That's gone. You're never seeing it. This rhetoric is having a real impact on every law enforcement agency throughout the United States. We're not the only ones, but things better change. I think they better change very soon, because I said earlier that you're going to have to pay a lot. That's the only way you're going to get people to come. And then they're coming for the wrong reasons. So what do we have in 10 years? You know, we have officers that didn't get in the job to help people. We have officers that got in the job just for the money.
Sure.
And what do you get?
Oh, that's never a good,
all kinds of problems.
Never a good
Not gonna be
scene,
good.
for sure. But tell me, you've told in past conversations that we've had, you've talked to me about diversity training that you've sent officers to, and the effort that you've made to really be an inclusive, equitable department. So tell our listeners a little bit more about some of that.
Well, I think diversity brings strength anywhere you look. We are cognizant of that, but you know, I want to bring people on that are good people. I mean, the days of hiring people that have muscles on top of muscles are over. One thing I ask new officers is, are you kind? Can you show empathy? Can you show sympathy? I don't care how many muscles you have. Okay, we're going to teach you to use everything on your belt. Hopefully you'd never have to use it. I want people to feel comfortable here, and diversity is a great thing. But it can't be we're making decisions based on this or based on that. I'm not going to do it. You know, I was talking to one of my captains earlier this morning, and I really, when you think about it, I can't think of anything more disgusting than a decision of any being based on someone's color, their skin, their religion, anything. It really, I mean, we're losing that right now in some of these things. Is I want good people serving good people. And I have nothing but respect for my community, and I want good police officers. And again, I'll go back to inclusiveness, and diversity has always been a strong thing. That's what our country's built on. And I will never not support that. However, I'm not going to be one to promote or hire someone based on anything other than their ability to serve the citizens of Brentwood.
What is, in your opinion, the number one quality that somebody should have to make a good officer?
Great question. It's going to totally sound simplistic. You have to be nice, and nice encircles so much, especially right now with the lack of trust communities have in their police department. I've had experience with police officers in my private life where they walked away and I'm like, what a jerk. Can't believe they said that. I hate that. You know what? I tell my coppers, we get complaints because we engage in very dangerous behavior, and there's going to be things you're going to have to do that don't look well. Use of force is not pretty. I've never seen a use of force that I can say, hey, that looks great. It always looks bad, right? But I'll tell you one thing that I can't tolerate, is rudeness or someone not showing compassion or empathy out there, right? That's totally within your control. And that's what I'm looking for in a new police officer for the Brentwood Police Department.
I think it's important, too, to just dovetail on what Chief said was that, and I remember previous chief saying that, it's important for the residents when they do have a bad interaction with a police officer to let them know. The police officers are an employee just like any other business. And some days you have good days and some days you have bad days, and they need to be kind. They need to be nice. And if you have a bad interaction, you got to call their boss and let him know so that he can address it with that officer and make it right.
For sure, there can't be any accountability if everything is just
Right.
kept quiet, if nobody does say anything, because then you end up with maybe an officer that, oh, well, I got away with that. What else can I get away with? And so it continues to exacerbate what is a potential problem and something that if somebody just speaks up, this officer can be held accountable for. So we've talked a lot about how you and the Brentwood Police Department helps the community and keeps them safe. So let's talk a little bit about how the community can help the police department with stuff. I know recently there was a post about anybody who is interested in possibly starting a neighborhood watch program. Tell us about Neighborhood Watch. Do we have any in Brentwood? Are they helpful, or do they just turn into a vehicle for nosy neighbors to kind of get out there and be like, guess what so-and-so is doing,
No, that's a great question. Thank you. And I'll be quick on this, but Neighborhood Watch has been around ever since I've been a police officer. I would say I'm a big fan of Neighborhood Watch. We have about 25 in the city right now. Council approved a new position for a community outreach officer, and she's doing a fantastic job of coming out of COVID and trying to get this. COVID really slowed us down. I really feel disconnected from my community right now. But here's the thing. A lot of people get on their keyboards and they log into all these social media things, and it's not very productive stuff that I see come out of there. I'll tell you what, when I show up to a Neighborhood Watch meeting or my officers go out there, I can talk to you, I can see you, I can see your emotion on your face, and we talk to one another, we meet one another, we take care of one another. I said it earlier, 65,000 or 130,000 eyeballs out there. Let's work together to keep Brentwood safe and to let the criminal know that if you come to Brentwood, we're all looking after one another. So Neighborhood Watch, again, if you're interested, contact the police department. We can get a lead there and get some cops out there to start it. Big fan of it. Not a big fan of social media.
I couldn't agree more.
I think the keyboard warriors get on there and get pretty emboldened on that, say a lot of nonsense.
I do think it's important to remember, though, Brentwood is an incredibly diverse community.
Love it.
And not just race or gender or religion. There's obviously a lot of diversity in political outlook as well. And I think it's important to remember that even though you might not see eye to eye with a neighbor politically or otherwise, it's still important to keep them safe and to have that grace.
Absolutely.
Well, I think it's like anything. It's about communication, right? If your neighbor's dog is barking or they're not parking their car partly in front of your driveway, if more people would just talk and communicate with each other, I think we'd have a lot less problems.
Well, let's get together before problems arise too, right?
Exactly.
It's okay and if a neighborhood watch meeting needs to get you guys together to know one another and get to know everybody's story, if everybody knew one another's story, they might be a little kinder to one another, okay? Because we're all dealing with a lot of pressures right now in society.
You never know what somebody else is going through.
Right.
Is there someplace that citizens can go to find a list of the different neighborhood? We said there's about 25. Is there someplace to go
they
to
can, they can contact Officer Loffridge at the police department, and she'll be able to hook them up.
She's done a great job. I've seen some of the stuff that she's spearheaded these past few months.
Yeah, we're really pleased with her.
Briefly tell us a little bit about the PAL program, Police Activities League, the Explorers, and some of the other means of community engagement that you try and promote?
Yeah, so PAL's been in the city of Brentwood since the mid-'90s. We have a PAL board that meets once a month. They do great work fundraising for some of our underprivileged youth in the community. Right now, COVID again shut PAL down and really caused it to almost come to a halt. Right now, we're coming out of that, so we're coming up with some golf programs, bringing some kids to some ball games over to see the A's and the Giants play. And we're trying to get a safe place back where these kids can go after school and get some good positive affirmation from some of our police officers and some of our leaders in our community. So that's coming out of COVID. And as far as Explorer program, we have an Explorer program. We have 17 Explorers right now. They range anywhere from the age of 15 to 20. And this is where I think our pool of upcoming police officers are. These young kids are great kids. They do well in school, and they're really committed to the police department. So, I can't think of a better place to start putting that in their ear to come work for the greatest police department in the United States, and that's the Brentwood Police Department.
So the Explorers program is sort of essentially an ROTC, but for the police force.
Yeah, it's a volunteer program, and they get to learn all aspects of law enforcement, and they have police officer leaders there and some mentors that they can go to. It's a great program. It's proved to be very successful.
I was going to say, as we're wrapping this up, don't you also have a program for adults to help volunteer at the police department as well?
Yeah, we have a volunteer program at the police department. It's a volunteers and policing program. So, yeah.
And what kind of things do
they help out on
tasks?
Community events as far as traffic control. They can work inside the office on filing, and there's all kinds of things that we utilize them for.
Fantastic. I think Brentwood PD does a great job at keeping our community safe. I know we necessarily don't see eye to eye on some political things and whatnot, but I have been your biggest advocate to anybody that I talk with who may say, be down on the police or something like that. I know that you're trying, and I know that right now it's a difficult society to be trying in and making these changes and really elevating your department. So I really appreciate your being here with us to talk a little bit more in depth. I'm sure we'll have you back at some point as well.
Well, I would just like to end by saying I've gotten a lot out of our conversations over the last year, and I respect where you're coming from, and I appreciate that you respect where I'm coming from, and that's what conversations need to be, right? We're not all right, but we believe we're right. So, I will never stop fighting for my community and the safety and the advocacy of victims. I will never support any bills, laws, or anything that benefit the criminal element. We've gone overboard. We need to get back to a law and order state. And that's going to take Sacramento, and that's going to take the voters to start paying a little more attention. I know we're all busy, but pay attention because there's some bad legislation. But I do want to throw out one. I totally always criticize Governor Newsom, but have you seen our freeways lately? You put a bunch of money toward cleaning up our freeway, go down Highway 4. I think our freeways and our green belts are starting to look pretty nice. So I will give the governor props on that.
Fantastic.
And you didn't burst into flames.
No, look at that.
Yeah. And to Chief, I've known you for 25 years and up the utmost respect for the Brentwood PD, and I know you have a tough job, and we just want to say thank you to you and all of your staff and officers for keeping us safe, because it's a lot of crime out there, and Brentwood is still a fairly safe place to live, and it's partly because of you and your leadership, and thank you.
Thanks, Craig, and thanks for your years of support. Absolutely.
It's all about grace and communication, right?
That's it, and it's better in Brentwood, and I appreciate our community, and thank you so much for what you guys do for the community, too.
That's it for today's episode of Clocked In with the Press. We really appreciate you taking the time to listen in, and be sure to tune in for our next interview, where we'll be sitting down with Brentwood Parks and Recreation Director Bruce Mulder to chat about all the fun summer opportunities coming your way. And of course, we do have our top stories and sports podcast every Friday for you. If you would like to read more news stories of East Contra Costa County, you can do so through our website at www.thepress.net or through our Twitter and Instagram at PressClockedIn. If you have any thoughts on this episode or any other before it, you can email them to podcasts with an S at brentwoodpress.com. That's all I have for you today, but I look forward to next time. This is Melissa
And Greg.
And Tom,
clocking out.
Once again, I'd like to thank this week's sponsor, Bill Brandt Ford, located at 8100 Brentwood Boulevard. Whether you're looking to buy a new Ford, a used Ford, or get some work done on your Ford, you want Bill Brandt Ford. Give them a call today at 925-634-3551. That number again is 925-634-3551. Or visit them online at BillBrandtFord.com. That's Bill Brandt, BRANDT Ford.com.